For 28 years, the world believed that Sister Grace and her 4 sisters vanished forever on a stormy September night in 1979. Some said we were dead. Some believed we ran away with men. But the truth is more horrifying than anyone could ever imagine. I am Grace. I am 70 years old, and today, for the first time after nearly 3 decades of living in the shadows, I will reveal the real reason. Why 5 young women had to climb over the convent walls in the dead of night and disappear from their old lives forever. This is not a story of shaken faith. This is a story of the devil hidden behind a holy cloth, but dark secrets concealed by sacred walls, of 5 women who paid with their lives to escape hell. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread no matter how they may shake what you believe. There are stories, however painful, that must be told. And this story will change the way you look at faith, at power, and at the price of truth. Prepare yourselves, because what I am about to reveal has been buried for far too long. Since I was a child, I was always a reserved person, preferring to observe rather than speak. My mother used to say I had a keen insight, able to see beyond the obvious. Perhaps that's why I was the only one who noticed the dark events unfolding in that convent. The only watchful eye that noticed the shadow casting itself behind the angelic smiles and daily prayers. I entered the convent at 16 of my own free will, moved by a desire to serve God in body and soul. In the early years, found exactly what I was looking for. The convent routine provided me with comfort and security, giving every moment of the day a purpose and a connection to something transcendent. The other sisters became my family, united by the same faith. There were only 5 of us nuns in that convent, led by our Mother Superior, Mother Agnes, a strict but fair woman. Havenwood was a small town where everyone knew each other. The convent, situated high on a hill, played a vital role in the community. It was in this context that I met Father Michael, who arrived at the parish when I was in my 5th year of religious life. He was a tall, imposing man with a voice that resonated with authority at the altar. At first, everyone admired him. But soon I began to notice unsettling subtleties, prolonged glances, questions during confession that overstepped the bounds of what was necessary, touches on the shoulder that lingered longer than acceptable, small gestures that added up revealed a disturbing pattern. I realized I wasn't the only one who felt uncomfortable. Sister Sarah, a young woman of only 19, also began to avoid being alone with him. The atmosphere in the convent changed, and joy gradually gave way to an oppressive silence laden with secrets and omissions. Mother Agnes fell ill around that time, a victim of severe pneumonia that kept her bedridden for weeks. Without her protective presence, the convent became vulnerable, and it was precisely during this period that the shadow I had been sensing transformed into something much more sinister and terrifying. Father Michael began to visit the convent more frequently, using his authority to put us in uncomfortable situations. I clearly remember the first time I witnessed something truly serious. I saw Sister Sarah cornered between the bookshelf and Father Michael in the library. He was holding her wrist tightly while her face reflected fear and shame. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. Thousands of thoughts swirled in my mind. Deep down, I knew something profoundly wrong was happening, something that went against all the principles that had motivated me to choose this life. I tried to talk to Sister Eleanor, desperate for an ally. At first, her response was silence, a wall built of shock and fear that I understood all too well. For days, she seemed paralyzed by the horror of it all. However, as the initial shock subsided, her sharp, methodical mind began to take over. The silence gave way to quiet, pointed questions. She started connecting details I had missed, and it was she, not I, who finally broke the stillness one evening by whispering the one word that could save us: proof. The discoveries I made shook me to my core, generating horror and indignation. The situation was not an isolated event, but a systematic practice, coldly planned and executed with cruelty. Faced with this, I understood that it was imperative to act as true faith does not submit to injustice. Genuine faith compels you to confront evil even when it presents itself under a mask of holiness. However, I did not imagine that this resolution would radically transform the course of my existence. Leading to a disappearance that would last 28 years, I would be forced to give up everything familiar and dear to me. Undergoing an irreversible metamorphosis. The St. Mary of Peace convent was like a bucolic painting with its gray stone walls, its narrow windows, a meticulously cared-for garden, and a small chapel that became even more charming in the early morning hours when fog settled over the town, creating the illusion of being closer to heaven. Our routine was simple and methodical. We would wake up at 5 a.m., pray together, and then each of us dedicate ourselves to our responsibilities. My main duty was to care for the vegetable garden in addition to helping in the kitchen. The contact with the damp earth provided me with a sense of deep connection with the Divine Sister. Martha, with her 65 years of experience, was in charge of the kitchen. Her loaves of bread were a delight with a crispy crust and an incredibly soft crumb. Production intensified on Wednesdays and Saturdays to be distributed among needy families. She used to say, "We feed the body to nourish the soul." Sister Eleanor was our intellectual dot. She dedicated hours to reading religious texts in the library. She had an admirable memory with an impressive ability to quote passages from the Bible. She always repeated, "Knowledge is a form of prayer." Sister Joy radiated happiness. She was dedicated to the children in the catechism classes who adored her. Her favorite phrase was, "A sad saint is a sorry saint," pronounced with a contagious laugh. Sister Sarah, the youngest among us, was still a novice, having arrived only 6 months prior to these dark events. Shy and gentle, we had bonded while working together in the garden, sharing a comforting silence. Shy like me, we worked together in the garden, sharing a comforting silence. Mother Agnes was our pillar, a firm and demanding figure, but with a generous heart. Her maxim was, "Discipline without love is tyranny, but love without discipline is indulgence." Our life was dedicated to service and prayer. In addition to our internal tasks, we provided help to the community. The convent was respected and recognized as a refuge of peace and kindness. It was in this atmosphere of simplicity that the shadow began to creep in. Father Thomas, our spiritual guide for many years, was transferred. He was a kind man who treated us almost like a grandfather. We were saddened by the news of his departure, but we understood the situation. Shortly after, Father Michael arrived. I clearly remember the first day I saw him at the altar. His presence dominated the space, and his voice resonated through the walls, strong and clear. Something about him caused me an inexplicable discomfort, but the other sisters seemed positively impressed. On his first visit to the convent, he brought gifts: a book for Sister Eleanor, a statue for the chapel, and seeds for our garden. During the first confession, his questions deviated from the usual and became more invasive. He showed interest in the details of my life before the convent and questioned my impure thoughts. His visits became increasingly frequent, always with some excuse. He needed to consult a book, had questions about medicinal herbs, or wanted to see if we needed anything. Every time he came, a somber atmosphere accompanied him. I began to observe patterns in his behavior, like the way he sought moments of privacy with the younger sisters, the intensity of his gaze, and the way he used his touch. His touches were seemingly casual, but they weren't. One day, Sister Sarah dropped a tool on the ground just as his voice was heard. Her hands were trembling so much that I had to help her. "What did he do to you?" I asked. Her only response was to cry while saying that he had threatened her, claiming that no one would believe her. I tried to talk to Mother Agnes, but she was outraged by my insinuations and told me to go pray and ask for forgiveness for my impure thoughts towards a priest. The situation worsened, and he began to act more boldly, as if he were sure he wouldn't be reported. I was a witness to the suffering on my sisters' faces, especially Sarah's, who was wasting away with each passing day. The situation reached a critical point when Mother Agnes fell gravely ill. The priest announced that he would come daily to watch over our spiritual well-being. It was then that his mask of sanctity fell completely. One night I found Sarah huddled in the hallway. her habit disheveled and a reddish mark on her cheek. He said, "No one will believe me," she murmured, adding that he called her a simple, insignificant nun while presenting himself as a representative of God that night. I understood that we were completely alone, that no one would come to save us, and that we would have to find a way to escape that nightmare ourselves. The walls that were supposed to protect us now imprisoned us along with our torment. And the man who was supposed to be our spiritual guide had revealed himself to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. It was imperative to do something, and I, the silent observer, would have to take the initiative. Have you ever felt that fear that paralyzes the soul? That makes your heart beat so hard it feels like it's going to break your ribs. I felt it constantly in that convent. After Mother Annis's illness, Father Michael proved to be cunning, knowing how to behave. So as not to arouse suspicion in front of several people, he appeared proper. But when he managed to isolate one of us, his inner demon manifested. I began to realize that he created situations on purpose, sending separate messages to each sister. "Sister Sarah, I need to discuss an important matter with you in the sacristy. Sister Grace, come to the library after prayers." Poor Sarah was the one who suffered the most, very young. Having just taken her final vows, she was too shy to defend herself. I witnessed on several occasions how he pressed her against the wall, how he spoke too close to her face, how his hands accidentally touched parts of the body that no man should touch. One night I found Sarah huddled in the pantry, trembling and adjusting her habit. "He says he's my spiritual guide," she whispered, adding that she must obey him and that if she told anyone, she would go to hell. My blood boiled, and for the first time I felt true hatred. I hugged Sarah and promised to protect her. But how? Who would believe the word of two nuns against a respected priest? I tried to talk to Sister Eleanor. "We have to do something," I said. Eleanor sighed and asked what I suggested, saying that no one would believe us, as a priest's word was worth more than ours. "But what about Mother Agnes?" "She has to know. The mother is very ill, and even if we had the chance, she would side with a priest against the church." The situation deteriorated further when Sister Joy also became a target of his attacks. Before always so cheerful, she began to become quiet, lose her appetite, and her eyes were now constantly red from crying so much. One afternoon, she finally broke down in sobs, telling me that Father Michael had called her for a special spiritual guidance and began to interrogate her about her chastity. The moment I tried to leave, she recounted, "He grabbed my arm with such force that he left a bruise. Something inside me broke. Seeing Joy, once so strong, reduced to that state, it was as if he were annihilating her very essence. I started to pay more attention and make plans to protect the sisters. I tried to make sure none of them were ever left alone with him, inventing tasks that had to be done in a group. However, he noticed my actions and began to isolate me, spreading information among the older sisters that I was showing problems with obedience. Sister Martha began to watch me with suspicion. Father Michael asked me, "Grace, is it true that you have shown rebellion?" My desire was to scream the truth, but I was aware it would be useless. She would never believe me over him. It was then that I understood that words would be insufficient and that I needed proof. I began to observe and meticulously record every detail, dates, times, his words, and his actions. One night he crossed all boundaries. Sarah came to my room trembling so much she could barely stand. Her face had finger marks, and her habit was torn at the shoulder. "He tried," she whispered in the confessional. "He said it was a penance that I had to give myself to him to be purified of my sins." The anger I felt was unlike any other emotion I had ever experienced. "This ends today," I declared. The next morning, under the pretext of needing to purchase special supplies for the infirmary, a task sometimes assigned to me, I was granted permission to go into town instead of heading to the market. I went straight to the office of the regional bishop. I waited for 3 hours until they received me. When I finally went in, I felt my courage waver. But thinking of Sarah and Joy, I found strength. I recounted everything, presented my notes, described the incidents. Hey, and explained how Father Michael used his authority to intimidate us. The bishop listened attentively in silence, and when I finished, he sighed. Sister Grace, these are extremely serious accusations. Father Michael is an exemplary priest. Are you sure? My heart sank. Despite all the evidence, doubts still lingered. I am absolutely sure, I replied firmly. I fear for the well-being of my sisters as long as he continues to have access to the convent. I will investigate the case. But I urge you to maintain absolute discretion. A scandal of this magnitude could seriously damage the image of the church. I left with a mixture of hope and apprehension. I had done everything in my power within the system. 2 nights later, Father Michael showed up at the convent outside of his usual hours. His face contorted with fury. He remained locked in a room with Sister Eleanor for almost an hour. When he came out, Eleanor looked devastated while the priest wore a triumphant smile. As he passed me, he whispered, "God punishes those who lie about his servants." The bishop told me everything. I was in shock. The bishop had revealed everything, including who had filed the complaint. Eleanor came to my room. "What have you done, Grace?" "You went to the bishop behind our backs." I tried to justify myself, but she shook her head, showing her disappointment. "Father Michael claims you have psychological problems, that you're making up stories. The bishop believed him and now demands that you be transferred or expelled." Reality hit me full force. Not only had they believed him instead of me, but now I was being punished for trying to protect my sisters. "It's not fair," I murmured. "He's hurting you." Eleanor sat on my bed, dejected. "Life isn't always fair, Grace, especially for women like us." The next morning I was called to the office. Father Michael was already there. With delight, he read the bishop's order aloud, savoring every word of my immediate transfer to a remote convent in rural Montana for insubordination and defamation against a man of God. In that instant, I understood that justice was unattainable for us within that structure. It was then that I made a decision that would transform my existence forever. I would not go to Montana. I would find an alternative, even if it meant disappearing. "We are going to leave," I declared to my united companions, "to flee." The mere mention of that word echoed ceaselessly in my mind, day and night. I never imagined that one day I would be planning an escape from a convent, the place I had chosen as my home. Yet there we were, 5 frightened nuns whispering in the cellar, surrounded by crates of potatoes and canned goods. Sister Eleanor, always thoughtful, expressed her hesitation. "If we run, well, look, guilty. They'll say we have something to hide." "And we do," replied Joy bitterly. "We have to hide our shame, our humiliation, the fact that the church has abandoned us." Sister Sarah just sobbed quietly, hugging her knees. Sister Martha, the eldest, remained silent for a long time. 60 years, she said finally. "For 60 years I have served God within these walls. I thought I would find peace in death here. However, now I realize that sometimes God demands sacrifices we do not understand. If it is necessary to leave to protect my sisters, then His will be done." Her words solidified our decision. We would flee together. But how could 5 women with no financial resources, no contacts, and no direction accomplish such a feat? The convent wall was imposing, adorned with shards of glass at the top. The gate was heavy and noisy, and even if we managed to get through it, where would we go? We needed outside help, someone we could trust. I prayed as never before, not reciting memorized prayers, but expressing the deepest feelings of my soul. "Lord, if we are doing your will, send us a sign." And He sent it in the most unexpected way. Mr. Miller, the supplier who delivered vegetables to the convent, a simple man of few words and calloused hands, who lived alone on a small farm on the outskirts of town, that day. As I helped him unload the crates, he looked at me differently. "You don't look well, Sister Grace," he commented in a low voice. I was surprised because Mr. Miller rarely said anything more than what was strictly necessary. "I'm fine," I replied with a forced smile. "Just a little tired." He continued to watch me. Forgive my prying." But my late lords used to say I had a gift for sensing when people are troubled. If you or the other sisters need help, you can count on me. My heart sped up. Was this the sign I had been waiting for, or a trap? What makes you think we need help? I asked cautiously. He sighed. My eldest daughter joined a convent up north. She also had problems with a priest. His eyes darkened. By the time she was finally able to tell me what had happened, it was too late. I felt an immediate connection with this man who carried his own pain. You're right, I confessed. We need help. A lot of help. In the following days, Mr. Miller became our ally. We exchanged information discreetly through notes hidden among the vegetables. In one of his notes, he told me about a section of the rear wall where the stones were crumbling and a large oak tree grew close, its thick branches extending over the top. No glass there, he wrote. The branches will give you cover and something to hold on to. I will leave an old rope ladder hidden in the bushes nearby. It was our only viable path. A plan began to take shape. Mr. Miller had a cousin in the mountains of North Carolina who owned a small... The cousin agreed to take us in temporarily. Mr. Ford of Ludov.orgs, Miller would use his savings to finance our journey and the initial period of adjustment. I can't stand by and watch you go through what happened to my Rosie, he declared with teary eyes. The plan was simple, though full of risks. We would escape on a night of torrential rain. Mr. Miller would wait with his pickup truck in a secluded spot on the road. We would have to climb the wall at the back where the trees provided natural cover. However, before anything else, it was essential. Items. Eleanor managed to get our birth certificates and identification documents from the archives. Joy managed to gather medications. Sarah and I took care of the clothes, aware that we couldn't wear our religious habits, as they would be easily recognizable. Mr. Miller got us plain clothes from a neighbor. The hardest part was deciding what to leave behind. The rosary my mother had given me, Eleanor's prayer book, Joy's small statue of Our Lady, Martha's family photo album. We had to travel with the bare minimum. As Eleanor reminded us, only what is strictly necessary. As the appointed day approached, the fear intensified. What if we were discovered? What if Father Michael found out? We can still back out, I suggested one night. I can go alone to Montana, as the bishop ordered. Don't even think about it, Joy interrupted me. If one goes, we all go. That same night, we heard a noise coming from the cellar. Someone was coming down the stairs. We froze in fear, but it was Sister Helen, an older nun who had always supported Father Michael. I know what you're planning, she said bluntly. My heart pounded. We were lost. To our surprise, Helen took money from her pocket. Take it. It's all I've saved from doing sewing jobs. Let it help you get started. I was momentarily speechless, alternating my gaze between the money and her. But why? I managed to ask. I always pretended to believe him because I was afraid. Because I'm too old to start over. Because I'm a coward, she confessed with a sigh. But you are not. You are young. You are brave. You deserve a chance to escape this hell. In that instant, I understood that we were not the only victims, that perhaps there had been others before us. I hugged Sister Helen. Come with us. It's not too late. She wiped her tears. For me, it is too late. But I will pray for you every day. The night before the escape, I couldn't sleep. I reflected on my family, my vocation, on God. Were we making the right decision? If we are doing your will, Lord, I pleaded in prayer, please protect us. The next morning, Mr. Miller left a note hidden among the lettuces. Tonight, at midnight, it will rain. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of suppressed nervousness. We performed our daily tasks as usual, trying not to arouse suspicion. At midnight, when the convent bell tolled 12 times, resonating above the sound of the rain, we took off our habits and placed them carefully folded in the cellar. I looked at my sisters, almost unrecognizable in their plain clothes. We were no longer fugitive nuns. We were women fighting for our freedom, our dignity, our lives. We went out through the pantry and the rain soaked us in seconds. Joy threw the rope of sheets over the wall. I climbed first, followed by her, then Sarah, Eleanor, and finally, with great difficulty, Sister Martha. In an agonizing moment, I feared she wouldn't make it, but then she reached the top, her eyes shining with a victory that transcended that wall, but which represented all the barriers she had overcome in her life. And then we ran. 5 ex-nuns in the rain. As planned, Mr. Miller, our sole support, was there. His old pickup truck was waiting, discreetly parked on a curve. 3 people squeezed into the cab while Joy and I hid in the back, covered by a protective tarp. And so we left, leaving behind the convent, the town, and the life we knew. At that moment, we couldn't imagine the extent of the journey that awaited us. We had no idea that our disappearance would cause a huge stir, that we would be intensely searched for, and that our names would be tarnished. We didn't know that we would spend 28 long years living in secret, playing out lives that didn't belong to us, carrying an excessively heavy burden. The night of the 17th of September, 1979 was deeply etched in my soul. The torrential rain turned the earth into slippery mud. The thunder drowned out the sound of our hurried steps. And the uncoordinated rhythm of our hearts reflected the terror that consumed us. In a few hours, we went from being dedicated nuns to fugitives. We abandoned our identity, our purpose, an entire life we had built. The truck swayed violently on the dirt road, and Joy and I were thrown against each other under the soaked tarp. The silence was almost absolute, only interrupted by occasional sobs. After what felt like an eternity, the truck slowed down. I felt my heart race, fearing we were being intercepted, that someone had betrayed us. But then I heard Mr. Miller's voice. "We're here, sisters. You can get out." I lifted the tarp and realized we were in a shed. The walls were wooden. There were tools hanging and sacks of feed stacked up. The characteristic scent of hay and animals floated in the air. "Where are we?" I asked, helping Joy down. "It's an old barn on my brother-in-law's property." Mr. Miller explained. "It's about 20 meters from Havenwood, and nobody has visited it for years. You can stay here for a few days." The place was simple but clean. In a corner there were mattresses and blankets stacked. An improvised table held some cans of food, bottles of water, and a lantern. "Mr. Miller." I began, emotional, but he just shook his head. "Rest now. I'll be back tomorrow with more food and news." After he left, we looked at each other. 5 soaked women shivering from cold and fear in an unknown barn. Sister Martha was the first to break the silence. "Let's thank God for having escaped, for having found a friend in Mr. Miller, for being together." We formed a circle, holding hands as we so often did in the convent. But this time there was no ornate chapel or altar, just us, our sincere prayers, and a God who seemed to have heard our pleas. After the prayer, we began to organize the space. Eleanor distributed the mattresses and blankets. Joy checked that everyone was okay, especially Martha, who seemed exhausted. Sarah and I organized the food and lit the lantern dot as we ate some bread and cheese. The silence returned, each of us lost in our own thoughts. "What are we going to do now?" Sarah finally asked in an almost inaudible voice. "We'll go to Mr. Miller's cousins in North Carolina," Eleanor replied. "There we'll decide the next step. We can't live on the run forever." "One day at a time, Sarah," she said softly. "First, we need to get far enough away to be safe." That first night, I slept very little, and every noise startled me awake. After being discovered, I woke up to the aroma of coffee. Sister Martha, always the first to rise, had lit a small stove and was preparing a light coffee. "Good morning, Grace," she said, smiling, offering me a steaming cup. I slept like I haven't slept in years without fear. That simple sentence struck me like lightning. It was true, despite the dangers for the first time in a long time. We had slept without the constant fear of what Father Michael might do. One by one, the others woke up. We shared the coffee and the rest of the bread, waiting for Mr. Miller's return. He returned around noon, bringing more food, dry clothes, and news. "The convent is in an uproar," he said. "They discovered the escape early this morning. Father Michael is furious, claiming you escaped due to conduct problems and spiritual rebellion." "Are they looking for us already?" Eleanor asked. "Yes. The police have been notified and they're searching the highways and bus stations. But no one will think to look for you here. It was then that he revealed more details of the plan. His cousin Sam would come to pick us up the next day with a larger truck and take us to his inn in North Carolina, where we could stay for a few weeks. "You need new names," Mr. Miller said. "New stories. You can't say you were nuns." Eleanor took a piece of paper and began to write. "We have to agree on a story. Who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we together?" In the following hours, we created our new identities. We decided we would be sisters and cousins, a family that had lost everything in a flood and was starting over. I stopped being Sister Grace and became Linda Peterson, a 24-year-old elementary school teacher. Sarah became Emily, my younger sister. Eleanor and Joy became our cousins, Catherine and Rose. And Sister Martha, our Aunt Millie, who had raised us after our parents' death. It was strange to rehearse these new identities, repeating the new names, the new story until they became almost real. Mr. Miller also brought me civilian clothes, as I hadn't worn anything but the habit for almost 10 years. Wearing those clothes was surreal. I looked at myself in a small broken mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. The habit wasn't just a garment. It was part of my identity. "You look younger," Joy commented. Almost I swallowed hard. I had never cared about my appearance. In the convent, vanity was discouraged. But now, looking at that woman in the mirror, I realized I was entering a world with different rules. The second night, anxiety about the future took hold of me. We were no longer just fugitives. We were about to become completely different people. I woke up before dawn, startled by a nightmare in which Father Michael found us. I left the barn and sat on the doorstep. The sky was clearing. A thin line of light on the horizon promised a new day. It was then that the full weight of what we had done fell on me. We had abandoned a whole life of devotion. We had broken sacred vows. Tears began to stream down my face. They were not tears of regret, but of grief for all we had lost. "Grace," I heard Sarah's voice behind me. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just thinking about the future." She sat next to me. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Me too," I admitted. "But we have each other and we have God. He still hears our prayers even after what we've done," she asked. "God doesn't reside in the walls of a convent, Sarah, nor in the habits we wore. God is here," I continued, pointing to her chest. "And here," I concluded, pointing to my own, "and He understands what we have been through." Suddenly, we heard the sound of an engine. We became nervous, but we immediately recognized Mr. Miller's pickup, and next to it, a larger truck. "This is my cousin Sam, Mr. Miller's pickup." Miller introduced, "He'll take you to North Carolina today. The truck is for furniture delivery," Sam explained. "You'll ride in the back, hidden. No one's going to stop a delivery truck. Are we ready?" I asked, aware that it wasn't just about physical baggage, but emotional preparation, something each of us felt in a particular way. Eleanor, determined. Joy, convinced. Sarah, fearful but brave. Martha, calm in her faith. We entered the truck, settling in among boxes and furniture. Mr. Miller hugged us before closing the doors. "May God protect you," he said with teary eyes. "You are the bravest women I have ever known." The doors closed, enveloping us in darkness. The engine roared, and we began to move. There, holding the hands of Sarah and Eleanor, I felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. Dread of the unknown, relief for finally being free. We stayed at Sam's Inn for almost 3 months. It was a quiet, isolated place, ideal for those who didn't want to attract attention. The few guests who passed through were tourists who stayed for a day or two and left. Mary, Sam's wife, treated us with a silent respect, never asking for details. One afternoon, as I was helping her hang the sheets, she took my hand and said, "I know you're running from something serious. I don't need to know what it is. I just want you to know that you're safe here." Those words filled my eyes with tears. It was as if someone truly understood our suffering without us having to explain. However, we were aware that we couldn't stay there indefinitely. The inn was modest, and we couldn't continue to live off the kindness of others. Besides, our disappearance had become news. They weren't headlines in major newspapers, but notes in local Pennsylvania papers and on regional radio stations. Nuns missing in Havenwood? Suspected kidnapping, said one. Parish priest of Havenwood reveals fugitive nuns had inappropriate behavior, announced another. I read these news stories in secret, my heart sinking. Father Michael was slandering us, portraying us as rebellious, problematic. Unworthy it was in one of these news stories that we learned that Mother Agnes had passed away. Not from the pneumonia she was recovering from, but from a heart attack after learning of our escape. We felt guilty for her death, although we knew the real culprit was the man who had forced us to flee. We can't go back, Eleanor said. Now they'll say we killed the mother with our behavior. With the help of Sam and Mary, we obtained new documents. Don't ask how. They told us because there are things it's better not to know. Suddenly, we were no longer sisters, Grace, Eleanor, Joy, Sarah, and Martha. We were Linda, Catherine, Rose, Emily, and Millie, a common family with a common story. Sam had an acquaintance in Cleveland, Ohio, who needed employees for his small garment factory. The work was simple, sewing uniforms, but it paid enough to support us. And most importantly, the acquaintance didn't ask questions. So after 3 months at the inn, we moved to Cleveland, where we rented a modest house in a remote neighborhood, seeking discretion and anonymity. Adapting was a considerable challenge. None of us were familiar with the customs of the modern secular world. Daily tasks like using a payphone, taking public transportation, or shopping at a supermarket were complex and unfamiliar. I remember the time we had to go to a bank to open a checking account. The tension overwhelmed me so much that I almost fainted in the waiting line. Eleanor, gifted with a singular courage, was always ready to face the unknown. Joy showed a natural aptitude for adaptation, while Sarah, despite her young age, learned quickly. Martha, for her part, strove valiantly. Overcoming the limitations imposed by age, the work at the factory was exhausting. But paradoxically, it provided us with some comfort. The repetitive movements of sewing had a calming effect on the mind. And for the first time, we felt we were actively contributing to our own livelihood. Little by little, we established a new routine. Although we had physically distanced ourselves from the church, our faith remained unshakable. Every night, we gathered to pray, not with formal pre-established prayers, but with intimate and sincere conversations with God. As time went by, months turned into years. Cleveland became a familiar and welcoming place. The factory prospered, and consequently our salaries increased, allowing us to move to a larger house. We made some friends, always maintaining a certain reserve and omitting crucial aspects of our story. The factory owner, Mr. Prominus, and Al Russo, recognizing Laner's talent, promoted her to production supervisor after a period of 3 years. The salary increase was of great value, especially because Martha was showing signs of increasing fragility. It was around 1983 when we suffered our first irreparable loss. Sister Martha, Aunt Millie, suffered a stroke while working in the kitchen. When we found her, it was too late to help her. Her funeral was one of the most painful experiences of my life. We couldn't bury her as Sister Martha with the honors she deserved. We were forced to bury her under the name Amelia Peterson, an ordinary old woman. After her death, we decided to move again. Mr. Russo was opening a branch in Charlotte, North Carolina, and offered Eleanor the manager position. We accepted the proposal immediately. Charlotte was a bustling metropolis where it would be easier to get lost in the crowd. However, we were also more exposed to the news and the possibility of being recognized. Our life went on quietly for almost a decade. I was beginning to believe that perhaps we had finally found peace when in 1994, I came across a photograph of Father Michael in a newspaper. Havenwood Priest celebrates 30 years of service to the community. The article's headline announced there he was a little older but with the same hypocritical smile as always. The report praised him as a pillar of the community, highlighting his tireless dedication. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. Not only had he escaped any consequences, but he had also prospered and was being acclaimed. While we were living in hiding, haunted by constant fear, The discovery moved us deeply. For the first time, we began to question whether we had made the right decision by fleeing, whether our silence had not allowed him to continue abusing other women. From that moment on, Eleanor became more introverted and taciturn. When I asked her what was wrong, she only replied, "I'm thinking about the future, Grace. What will we do when we're too old to work?" In 1997, Eleanor fell ill. At first, we thought it was just a cold, but her health deteriorated rapidly. The doctor diagnosed her with pneumonia, and she was hospitalized. In the third week of hospitalization, Eleanor revealed the truth. "It's not just pneumonia, Grace. It's advanced stage cancer." The news devastated me. Eleanor was our strength, our rock. On her deathbed, Eleanor grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Grace, you must promise me something," she pleaded. "Promise me that one day the truth about what happened in Havenwood will come out. We can't let that monster continue to live as if he were a saint." However, doubt tormented her. Who would believe us now after so much time? With a weak voice, she murmured, "It's not time yet, but someday, Grace. Someday, when it's safe, promise me." Eleanor Catherine passed away 2 weeks later. She was buried in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Charlotte in a modest and discreet funeral without the honors she truly deserved. The loss of our leader was a heavy blow. The following years were a blur of adapting and rebuilding. Sarah Emily found some happiness when she married her boyfriend from the factory and moved into her own house nearby. Grace and Joy continued to live together. Two single sisters devoted to their work, occasionally visiting churches in distant cities, searching for a familiar peace. On one of these trips, Joy confessed, "Sometimes I wonder if God has forgiven us for breaking our vows. Do you think we need forgiveness for running from an abuser?" Grace replied, "Not for that," Joy clarified, "but for abandoning our vocation, for never trying to find another convent far away from that monster." Grace realized Joy still yearned for the structure and purpose of religious life. Her heart ached for it. Just 2 months after Eleanor's death, that same heart began to fail her when Joy was diagnosed with a chronic heart condition. She lived with it for several years, but in 2003 she also passed away, slipping away silently in her sleep. So only Grace and Sarah remained. Sarah had 2 children, her own house, and a life as Emily Rodriguez, no longer as the ex-nun. For a few years, Grace continued to live alone, working at the factory. However, in 2005, when they sold the branch, she decided it was time for a change. She moved to a small town in the foothills of North Carolina, bought a modest house, and opened a sewing shop. Emily and her family visited her several times a year as she aged. The promise she had made to Eleanor weighed more and more on her conscience. The truth about Havenwood could not die with her. But how to fulfill that promise without endangering Emily's life? How to reveal the truth after so much time with no more proof than her word? The answer began to emerge gradually as she collected news, followed clues, and gathered courage. In 2007, she felt she was finally ready to take the step that would change everything again. The step that would take her out of silence, that would give voice to the story that had been silenced for so long. Fear manifested itself in various ways. Some days it appeared as a tightness in the chest that prevented her from breathing. Others, it was a persistent chill in the stomach. And there were times when it was just a shadow at the corner of her eye. Something almost imperceptible, but that never completely disappeared. During those 28 years of anonymity, Grace came to know all the faces of fear. Even in the moments of greatest tranquility, it was present, reminding her that everything could collapse. Every priest she crossed paths with made her heart race. Does he know Father Michael? Every mention of Havenwood paralyzed her. Have they found us? They could never be completely sincere. They had to be always alert, remembering which version of the story they had told each person. It was like living on a stage all the time, acting without ever being able to relax. And that was even harder than the fear itself. The constant fear that haunted us was the possibility of being discovered and what Father Michael would do if he found us. He was not one to let things go. He was vindictive, cruel, and had the power of the church on his side. Sarah Emily, in particular, suffered enormously. Being the youngest, she was also the one who had been most violated and who had the deepest scars. For many years, nightmares tormented her almost every night, waking her up, screaming, bathed in cold sweat, and trembling. "He found me," she would repeat between sobs. "He's here. He came to get me." On those occasions, I would hold her until she regained her composure. Softly, singing the same hymns that echoed in the convent halls. It was the only balm for her anguish. The nightmares lessened, especially after her marriage and the birth of her children, but they never completely left her. The trauma was indelibly ingrained. Eleanor, on the other hand, seemed to deal with the fear better, always staying pragmatic and focused on the present. "What's the use of consuming ourselves with what might happen?" she would reflect. "Let's live one day at a time." However, even she had her moments of fragility. One night, I found her crying alone on the balcony. "I'm exhausted, Grace," she confessed. "Exhausted from pretending, from lying, from never being able to be who I really am." I understood her perfectly. There were days when I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Who was this? Linda Peterson reflected there what had happened to Sister Grace. However, fear was not the only burden we carried. Guilt also accompanied us incessantly. Guilt for having escaped instead of fighting. Guilt for having left other women in a vulnerable situation. Guilt for having renounced our vows. And above all, fury, a rage that consumed us from within. Rage against Father Michael for having devastated our lives. Rage against the church, which should have protected us. Rage against a world that allowed men like him to prosper while their victims took refuge in the shadows. Over the years, I tried to stay informed about the events in Havenwood without arousing suspicion. The news that reached me outraged me more and more. Father Michael not only remained in his position as parish priest, but he rose in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, being graced with honors and expanding his influence. In 1985, he was elevated to the title of Monsignor. In 1992, he inaugurated a new wing of the main church. In 2000, he received the title of Honorary Citizen. And most outrageous of all, in 2004, he was appointed to lead a small seminary where young men were preparing to become priests. Meanwhile, in the scarce mentions of the case of the missing nuns, we were described as rebellious, ungrateful, and unbalanced. Some thought we had run off with men, while others hinted that we had embezzled money from the convent. No one, absolutely no one, dared to suggest the truth. That we had escaped to flee a predator. After the death of Mother Agnes, the convent came under the direction of a new superior. The number of nuns gradually decreased, and in 2002, it was officially closed, with the building being donated to the city to be converted into a cultural center. Knowing this broke my heart. That place had been my home, my refuge before the arrival of Father Michael. Around that time, I began to have recurring dreams about Mother Agnes. In the dream, she was in the garden next to the statue of Our Lady. "Why didn't you tell me?" she would ask with a choked voice. "Why didn't you trust me?" I would wake up crying. If we had trusted her from the beginning, if we had been more insistent, perhaps everything would have been different. Perhaps she wouldn't have died that way, believing that her nuns had abandoned her. Starting in 2003, I noticed that these thoughts were becoming more frequent. I felt exhausted from bearing the weight of this secret alone, and from witnessing Father Michael's success while my sisters passed away, each far from her home. One night, after dreaming of the Mother Superior, took the notebook that Eleanor had given me, kept for many years without daring to open it. However, at that moment, I finally removed the lock and looked through the yellowed pages. What I found left me perplexed. Eleanor had meticulously recorded everything, including dates, times, and incidents of abuse, as well as the names of other nuns who had suffered at the hands of Father Michael before us. There were also transcriptions of conversations revealing that church authorities were aware of the facts, but chose to ignore them. In the last pages, Eleanor had written a kind of will. "Grace, my dear sister, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer here. I have documented everything, not for revenge, but in search of justice, not only for us, but for all the women who preceded us and for those who may come after. Silence protects the oppressors, never the oppressed. I know you are afraid and that you think no one will believe us after so much time. But the truth has an inherent strength. I am not asking you to expose yourself to danger. Wait for the right moment. Wait until he is too old to harm anyone. Wait until other voices rise up, as I know one day they will. And when that time comes, use these pages. Use our story. Use your voice, which has always been stronger than you imagine. Do not let us die in vain, Grace. Do not let our escape have been in vain. With all my love, Eleanor. I closed the notebook with trembling hands. Eleanor always knew this day would come. She always knew that I would be the last one who had to reveal their story. After that night, I began to prepare. On the rare occasions I met with Emily, I would talk to her, trying to understand if she would be ready to face the past. I don't want my children to know, she said firmly. I don't want them to carry this story. I don't want them to see me differently. I respected her decision. Emily had suffered more than anyone and had the right to her peace. Then I will do it alone. I decided when the time is right. And I kept waiting, watching. In 2006, I read that the priest, now Monsieur Michael, had suffered a stroke. It wasn't serious, but for the first time, I realized he wasn't invincible. Then in January 2007, I saw a news story that made my heart stop. A new priest had been appointed to assist Monsieur Michael in Havenwood due to his delicate health. His name was John. I frantically researched him. He was young, about 30 years old, and had been recently ordained after a career as a university professor. He was known for his work with at-risk youth and for his progressive positions. More importantly, in an interview when asked what had led him to the priesthood, he mentioned that his sister had been a nun and that her example of faith had been an inspiration even after her premature death. His sister, a young deceased nun. There were no names, no details. It could be a coincidence. But something inside me told me it wasn't. I needed to find out more about this Father John. I needed to know if he could be an ally. If anyone would be able to believe our story, it would be at this moment. It was there that I made the most difficult decisions since that fateful rainy night almost 3 decades ago. When we climbed the convent wall to return to Havenwood to face the past I had escaped from. My real name is not Linda Peterson. I began as soon as Father John closed the door to his office. My name is Grace, Sister Grace, from the St. Mary of Peace Convent. He furrowed his brow, perplexed, and then his eyes widened. The nun who disappeared in 1979? I felt my heart race. There was no turning back. But that's incredible, he exclaimed, pointing to a chair. Everyone assumed you and the others had died. It's one of the great mysteries of this town. I didn't die, I replied. We escaped. We all fled. And now I've returned to reveal the reason for our escape. I'm listening, he said, attentive. I took a deep breath and began to narrate. I told him about the first years of happiness in the convent, the arrival of Father Michael, and how he turned our sanctuary into a place of terror and abuse. I told him about his attacks on Sarah, on Joy, on all of us, of my frustrated attempts to report him to the bishop, and of the desperate escape on that rainy night. As I spoke, I observed his reactions. At first he seemed skeptical, but as the details accumulated, the dates coincided with events he knew. His facial expression transformed. I perceived shock, then indignation, and finally sadness. I have proof, I declared, taking Eleanor's notebook from my bag. My sister, Sister Eleanor, she meticulously recorded everything. Dates, times, specific incidents, names of other victims before us. Conversations that indicated that church authorities were aware. He took the notebook with trembling hands and flipped through the yellowed pages. His face palled. "My God," he murmured. "My God. My God." We remained in silence with the weight of the revelation upon us. Finally, he closed the notebook and looked at me with tear-airy eyes. "Father," I asked hesitantly, worried that I might have made a mistake. that he might be loyal to Monsieur Michael. I cannot express how sorry I am for everything you and your sisters have been through, he said with a choked voice. And how ashamed I am to know that the church, which should have protected you, failed you so profoundly. A wave of relief washed over me. He believed me. After so many years of my story being denied, discredited, distorted, finally someone from the church believed me. Thank you, I managed to say with a choked voice. But why now? He asked, leaning forward. Why come back after all this time? I told him about the deaths of my sisters over the years, the promise I had made to Eleanor, how I had followed Father Michael's ascending career. And when I saw your name in the paper, I said, I felt that maybe it was a sign that maybe you were different, that you could help me finally reveal our story. How can I help? He asked. I explained that I wanted justice not only for myself and my sisters, but for anyone else Father Michael might have harmed over the years, that I wanted the truth to be known, that our names be cleared. But I'm afraid, I confessed. He still has power here. There are still people who defend him, and now I'm alone. No, said Father John firmly, you are not alone anymore. I will help you tell your story. I will be by your side. In the following days, with complete confidentiality, we worked together under the direction of Father John, who showed a firm determination to follow proper procedures. His main goal was to ensure that this time the church could not silence the case. To do this, he contacted a younger bishop in the diocese, known for his combative stance on cases of abuse within the ecclesiastical institution. In collaboration, they formalized my account, meticulously examined Eleanor's notebook, and searched for old records that could corroborate our allegations. Fortunately, Monsignor Michael was temporarily away in the state, capital seeking medical treatment, while analyzing old documents in the parish archives. I came across a disturbing discovery. A letter dated 1977, 2 years before our escape, sent by a former superior to the bishop at the time. The missive expressed concern about Father Michael's behavior with the young nuns and requested, in discreet terms, that he be transferred to a position that did not involve direct contact with religious women. The bishop's response, written in the margin of the letter, was concise. Matter resolved internally, followed by the filing of the document without any effective action being taken. They knew, I murmured, holding the paper with trembling hands. They knew even before us, and they did nothing. The church has made countless mistakes, acknowledged Father John, placing a hand on my arm in a gesture of support. Grave, unforgivable mistakes. However, today we are committed to doing the right thing. A week later, the father took me to a meeting with the auxiliary Bishop Mattis, his trusted friend. The bishop, a middle-aged man with a kind gaze and a serious expression, listened attentively to my entire story without interrupting me. At the end of the account, he made a gesture that left me perplexed. He stood up, approached, and knelt before me. Sister Grace, he said with a choked voice, on behalf of the church that failed you and your sisters, I ask for your forgiveness. We have no justifications, only shame and repentance. I was speechless, with tears streaming down my face. After 28 years of running, hiding, and living in fear, finally someone with authority in the church recognized our suffering. What will happen now? I asked as soon as I regained my voice. The bishop explained that, with the evidence gathered, it would be necessary to initiate a formal investigation into Monsignor Michael. He warned me that I would have to give a statement, that the process would be arduous, and that there would be people who would not believe me. However, he assured me that they would be by my side and that they would not repeat the mistakes of the past. At that moment, Father John asked about Sarah. She is alive, I confessed after hesitating, but she has built a new life with a new name. She has a family, children, and doesn't want to be involved in this. Both showed understanding. We will respect her decision, the bishop assured. Her name will not be mentioned without her permission. The next morning, the meeting I had feared for decades took place. Monsieur Michael had returned and requested an urgent audience with Father John. Apparently, someone had informed him of the young priest's searches in the old archives. We were in the office, me, Father John, and Bishop Mattis, when Monsieur Michael entered without knocking. He stopped abruptly, showing surprise at seeing the bishop, whose presence there was not expected. Then his eyes fixed on me. For an instant, he didn't recognize me. After all, I was now a middle-aged woman with graying hair and wrinkles. When I finished narrating the events of that night at the community center, the silence was so profound that you could hear the breathing of each person present. I recounted everything directly and objectively, detailing the abuses committed by Father Michael. After a failed attempt to get help, I initiated a desperate escape and remained in hiding for 28 years under false identities. I spoke of my deceased sisters, Martha, Eleanor, and Joy, who took the secret with them and were buried under names that did not belong to them. I mentioned the promise I made to Eleanor that one day the truth would come out. I made no mention of Sarah. For everyone present, the narrative involved only 4 nuns, not 5. It was a small falsehood inserted into a great truth, and I was convinced that God would understand. At the end of my account, I observed a crowd of faces. Some were crying openly, others showed expressions of shock. A minority, especially those who had known the Monsignor for decades, manifested disbelief bordering on anger. It was Mrs. Teresa Morera, the retired teacher, respected by all, who broke the silence. She stood up slowly and with an audible voice declared, "Sister Grace, I believe you. And I am deeply sorry that no one believed you before." Other voices began to join hers. A middle-aged man shared that his sister had been a novice in the convent before us, and that she left suddenly without explanation, never being the same person again, never returning to a church. An elderly woman confessed that she had heard rumors about Father Michael's behavior years ago, but ignored them, considering such conduct impossible from a man of God. Now in tears, she acknowledged her mistake. Little by little, more people shared their perceptions, small incidents that together delineated an irrefutable pattern. Father Michael was not the saint he appeared to be. Evidently, not everyone was convinced. Some left angry, muttering that it was all an invention, that I was nothing more than an unbalanced woman seeking attention. Others remained silent, which was understandable considering that Monsignor Michael had been a central figure in the life of Havenwood for almost 3 decades. In the following days, the news spread rapidly. Local newspapers covered the story initially with caution and then with more details as more evidence emerged. A journalist from the state capitol came to interview me, and her report was reproduced in several other media outlets. Monsignor Michael filed a defamation lawsuit, denying all accusations, calling me a liar, and alleging that it was a conspiracy to tarnish his reputation. His lawyers argued that it was convenient for me to make such accusations at a time when many witnesses had already died. However, he did not count on the vast amount of evidence we had. Eleanor's notebook, the damning letter from a former superior we had uncovered in the archives, and above all, the growing number of other victims, who began to come forward inspired by my courier madness, as some preferred to call it, X. Nuns, women from the community who had been harassed during confession, and even ex-seminarians who reported strange punishments and humiliations went public. The case grew stronger and gained notoriety. The church, pressured both internally and externally, had no choice but to take the investigation seriously. 2 months later, Monsignor Michael was officially removed from his duties, and a canonical process was initiated to investigate his actions over the decades. Perhaps the most impactful moment was when I received a visit from Sister Sophia, one of the few nuns who still remained in the convent when we fled. "I have come to ask for your forgiveness," she told me as soon as she entered. "I knew not everything, but I suspected, and I did nothing. I was afraid, ashamed, and because of my silence, you and the others suffered." Other people suffered. I hugged that frail lady whose shoulders trembled convulsively with sobs, and I cried with her. There was no anger inside me, only the realization of how the system had abandoned us. The entire town of Havenwood was forced to confront a searing truth. It's an arduous and painful process. There were days when I received an avalanche of messages of support, so many that I could barely read them all. On the contrary, there were nights when I needed police protection due to the threats left at my door. However, little by little, even the most skeptical began to realize that the evidence was irrefutable. The truth, as Eleanor had written, had an inherent power. The canonical process lasted almost a year. The decision handed down was more forceful than many expected. He was officially leicized, stripped of his clerical status. For many victims, including me, the punishment seemed insufficient. He would not go to jail as the crimes were very old and had passed the statute of limitations. He would keep his retirement, his house, his freedom. However, there was a form of justice in the fact that he had lost what he most cherished: his status, his power, his influence. The man who had once used the sacred cloak to abuse and subdue was now stripped of that same cloak. A few weeks later, he left Havenwood secretly in the middle of the night. No one knew his whereabouts. At that moment, he was living the same kind of exile to which he had condemned us for 28 years. Today, at 70 years old, I revisit the past and glimpse a journey I never imagined I would travel. From the 16-year-old girl who entered the convent full of faith to the 4-year-old who fled on a stormy night, through the woman who lived for decades in hiding to who I am now, someone who has finally found peace with her past. The St. Maria Peace Center has become the reason for my existence for the last 15 years. From a small embryonic project, it has blossomed and become a benchmark in the American Northeast. We have psychologists, lawyers, social workers. We help hundreds of women regain their voice, their strength, their ability to start over after abuse. Emily, my dear Sarah, moved to Havenwood 5 years ago after the death of her husband. Her children were grown and she wanted to spend her last years near me, her true family. She currently works with me at the center, especially with the younger women who see in her a living example that it is possible to build a happy life even after the deepest trauma. Father John is still the parish priest, rejecting promotions. My place is here, he always says, where I can witness the real impact of my work daily. Over the years, we have become great friends, partners in the mission of transforming the old convent into a place of healing. Monsieur Michael passed away in a nursing home in Florida, isolated from everything and everyone. They say he died alone, that no one attended his funeral. I didn't feel joy upon receiving the news, just a strange sense of closure, as if a final chapter had been written. Sometimes when I walk through the Sense Gardens and look at the 5 stone benches with our names, Martha, Eleanor, Joy, Sarah, and Grace, I feel the presence of my sisters who have gone. I can almost hear Joy's laugh, Eleanor's serene voice, feel Martha's wrinkled hands. And I know with a conviction that transcends reason that they are at peace, that our suffering was not in vain. It is gratifying to know that my story is helping other people find their own voice. Reflecting on this journey, I realize the immensity of what I have learned, and it's hard to know where to begin. Perhaps the most important lesson concerns the essence of true faith. Upon entering the convent, I imagined that faith meant following dogmas, obeying authority figures, and accepting everything without question. It was this limited vision that unfortunately allowed Father Michael, and many others, to abuse the power they had. Today, I understand that genuine faith is infinitely deeper and more challenging. It resides in the courage to doubt when something seems wrong. Even if that disagreement is with someone in a position of power, it is believing in one's own intuition, in that inner voice that leads us to the truth. It is having the conviction that God cares more about justice and love than about hierarchies and mere appearances. Furthermore, I have learned a lot about the nature of evil and how it spreads in silence. Father Michael was not an isolated monster, but a common man who was corrupted by power, lack of oversight, and the culture of fear that permeated the church. He perpetuated his abuses for so long because no one dared to speak up, because the victims were silenced, because witnesses preferred to ignore, and because the institution prioritized its own reputation over the truth. That is why I always tell the women we welcome at the center: your voice is the most powerful weapon you have. Use it even if it trembles. Even if at first it is only a whisper. Do not be silent. Another important lesson was about the power of community and solidarity. Alone, none of us would have survived. Together, we found strength, and it was thanks to the generosity of unknown people that we were able to rebuild our lives. Similarly, it was through a new community of support that I was finally able to reveal the truth. Finding some justice and peace. No one overcomes trauma alone. No one heals in isolation. We need each other desperately. And finally, I learned about forgiveness. Not the forgiveness imposed from the outside, which only serves to silence the victim, but the forgiveness that arises naturally over time. As we understand that resentment only keeps us tied to the past, I forgave myself for not having been able to stop Father Michael, for having fled, and for having remained silent for so many years. I forgave the institution that failed us, not to absolve it, but to free myself from the anger. And most importantly, I forgave God. For a long time I was in rebellion against him. How could he allow so much evil in his house? How could he seem so absent when we needed him most? Today I understand that God was present all the time in the courage we found to escape, in the kindness of the people who helped us, and in the strength we discovered within ourselves. God never promised us a life without suffering, only that he would be with you in the midst of it. I learned that pain teaches, but it is faith that sustains. The phrase pain can either destroy us or teach us has become my mantra. But it is faith, not blind faith, but faith that questions, faith that seeks the truth, that sustains us in the darkest nights. Many ask me if I still consider myself a nun. My answer is always the same. I have never stopped being Sister Grace in my heart. The vows I took at 16, poverty, chastity, and obedience. I still keep them in my own way, not out of obligation, but by choice. And as for obedience, I have learned that true obedience is not directed at an individual or an organization, but at the divine manifestation within us. Responding to the call of integrity and fairness, 28 years of living in fear have taught me this. Life isn't about avoiding suffering, but about finding meaning in our trials. Every day I woke up during those years in hiding was not a wasted day. It was a day I learned to live true to myself. My friends, if my story can convey a single message, let it be this: never let anyone take away your voice. Do not let silence become an accomplice to evil. And most importantly, it is never too late to seek truth and justice. It took me 28 years to find the courage to speak up. But when I did, I not only freed myself, but also paved the way for hundreds of other women. Today, the St. Mary of Peace Center has helped over 3,000 women escape violence and abuse. Life is the most precious gift we have. Every day is a chance to change, to speak out, to do what is right. Emily, the Sarah of the past, is now a grandmother to 4 grandchildren. She often tells me, Grace, if we hadn't escaped that night, how could I have the happy family I have today? That is the meaning of life, and not perfection, but the ability to rise from the ashes, to find light in the darkness, and to turn pain into the strength to help others. If you have followed my story this far, it means you believe in the power of truth. Please leave a comment saying, I believe, so I know you are listening. Like this video if you believe everyone deserves to live in safety and with respect. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because there are many more stories that need to be told, many more truths that need to be exposed. Each subscription from you is a voice of support for those who cannot protect themselves. My life has proven that it is never too late to start over. It is never too late to seek justice, and it is never too late to believe in love. Thank you for listening. Live true to yourselves, and remember, your voice has TH.